All right, now we're gonna move on to our fourth square. I'm just gonna move my palette up here. And this is where we're gonna do a wet on wet technique. And we're gonna let these dry, and they're still kind of wet in a few little areas, and you can kind of see how the water is absorbing into the paper, and you'll be able to kind of touch that and feel the difference. So this is gonna be a really fun technique to use. This is great for creating a lot of texture, more abstract work. And I'm gonna be using a red and a green for this. And since I want my green to be a little bit more concentrated, I'm gonna use my undersea green. So this is just a little bit darker. And I'm just gonna use this little palette here. I don't need a whole lot. So if you already have a green, you can kind of give yourself just a little bit in your palette. You can see just how little I need. That's actually probably a lot more than what I actually need. So I'm going to use my my small round brush here, which is just a number 3. You can use your round brush that's a little bit bigger. This is not really specific to a brush. I'm just going to use something a little smaller for this. So we're just going to use water initially, because the wet on wet technique really just means you're using wet paper and wet paint. And your paint's just going to be wet anyway, so that's kind of a given. But wet paper, and what I mean by that is you can actually just use the water initially. And with a smaller brush, smaller brushes hold less water. So I'm gonna have to kind of dip my brush in there, and I'm doing a triangle. So it may be difficult to see in this video, but if you kind of tilt your head around a little bit, you'll be able to see the sheen on your paper from what you're painting with just the water. And I'm going to fill in the triangle with the water, just kind of completely paint it with that. Now, while this is still wet, I'm gonna take my brush, I'm gonna dip it directly into the red paint. That way it's nice and saturated. And then at the top of the triangle, I'm just gonna tap. And you can already start to see how that paint is really mixing in there with the water. What's really fun is when you pick up your palette and you let it go all the way to the bottom. So gravity is helping me with that. Now, if you wanted to kind of keep going, I'm just going to grab a little bit more water, tap it up here at the top, and tilt my board up just a little bit. But this is really a technique that does not really require any brushing, which is great. So I'm going to grab some more paint and just kind of keep tapping that in. And that sort of spread around. You can kind of tilt it to this way, you can tilt it that way and watch it go. You can tilt it back the other way and watch it flow back to the very top. But the less that you touch this and the less that you try to paint or do any kind of brush strokes on it, the better that this is gonna look. You know, you can come down here and you can kind of see what that's gonna look like if you just sort of tap. You see all these little veins in here, and that's just the texture of the paper that it's picking up, which is really fun. So I'm gonna leave that alone. And then I'm gonna rinse my brush out, and I'm going to grab some of my green, my really dark green here that I've got concentrated. I'm gonna mix that in with the green that I already have on my palette so that I've got some water here to use. All right, so I'm gonna load my brush up with that green. And on the very bottom of our triangle, I'm just gonna drag that green across. Grab a little bit darker. pull that across there. So you see how that color just jumped right up in there into that red? And now we have a slice of watermelon. So once this dries completely, which, you know, while it's still wet, it's still kind of mixing and doing its thing, but once it really absorbs into that paper, it's gonna look really, really interesting. If you look at something like this right here, where we had a lot of water and kind of did our little splotch here, you see just how much texture and things that happen to these that just look really, really fascinating to me. This is a great example over here of that granulation, of how those two colors separate from each other. It's so unique, and I love the way that it looks. So we're gonna let that dry, and then we'll come back and we'll do some interesting things with it. But in the meantime, so there's some different things that you can use that wet on wet technique for. I use it a lot in probably all of my portraits. I sneak it in somewhere, whether it's in the landscaping or somewhere on a house or something within a pet portrait. I really like doing it. I'm gonna grab my larger round brush now, and I'm going to do something that I love doing for people, which is a birthday card with balloons. So I'm just gonna draw kind of an oval. It's a little bit bigger at the top and a little bit smaller at the bottom. And I'm gonna leave a couple little areas that don't have water on them. And I'm just gonna drop in some of this paint color here.
Some more chocolate?
You want some more chocolate?
Yeah.
All right. Gonna watch how this red moves for me. So I'm gonna fill this out a little bit. It's kind of that like reflection on a balloon. All right, so let's paint a couple more balloons. Now you don't have to use just clear, plain water. With this, you can use just a very translucent color. I'm gonna take a little bit of my yellow and drop that in. And remember, if you wanted to move a little bit more, kind of go around, just take some extra water on your brush and just sort of drop that in. I like the unknown when it comes to this type of work, because you really never know what it's going to look like when it's completely done. And that's sort of the fun part about it, is that once it dries, it's completely unique. And you can buy, you know, little watercolor cards, or you can just take watercolor paper and create your own birthday cards or greeting cards, you know, just kind of whatever you feel like you'd like to do. All right, now I'm gonna do some of the blue. I just love how this looks. So you can take that and move that around. But it's just really fun. And you can kind of keep adding colors. You can mix colors if you wanted to do a couple different colors in these balloons. That's also really fun. I'm gonna give it a little triangle here at the bottom. This is a really fun thing that you can do with that wet on wet technique. And once this dries, you can add some more things to it and, you know, give this to people, and they will look at it and think, oh my gosh, that's so cool. How did you do that? You're a watercolor artist, and this required so little painting that you don't have to tell anybody how you actually did this, which is great. So we're gonna let that dry and then come back to it. Now that this is all dry, can see how each one of those dried a little differently, and you can see how our watermelon is dried. It's looking really interesting right now, so that's good. I want to show you my little tackle box here of some of my other supplies. I can try to keep my brushes and pencils and tools that I actually use on the most regular basis. Kind of keep those together there. And micron pens are acid-free, so these are really great to use on any watercolor painting because they're not going to yellow or turn colors as they age, but these are really nice to add fun little details and touches to a painting. So you can draw in like little seeds for the watermelon and give it some fun features to it. So it doesn't have to just be watercolor only. You can absolutely add anything to these that you like. So this is really good. I like the micron pens, and they come in a lot of different sizes and colors as well. Another thing that I like to use are colored pencils. White is really great for if you want to add, you know, some highlights to something. And I'm just kind of showing you how this looks. The darker the color of the watercolor, the more that that's going to show up on whatever that is. So colored pencils are great to use. I love mixing that in there, and regular pencils as well. Jelly roll pens are another fun thing to use, and I like using the white just because it's an ink and it looks really great on watercolor. So you can see what a difference that makes between just a colored pencil and then the ink itself. So these are something I use a lot in my home portraits and pet portraits, just for doing little areas where they need a little reflection or highlight, window panes even. This is a really great tool to kind of keep. And these come in a lot of different colors and variations as well. So these are kind of fun to use. And then if I need something that is a little bit more opaque, because you can see as it dries, it's still just a tad transparent. But white gouache is an opaque watercolor. Gouache is technically a watercolor, but it's just an opaque watercolor. So you may have not ever seen these or ever heard of this, but gouache is spelled Gouache. And this is just a white and very concentrated, but it's very, very thick and opaque. So this is going to be similar to acrylic and kind of like oil, but it's a watercolor. So you still use water to use this. And you can, you know, get a pack of gouache paints, but they're really fun to use and play with if you want to sort of mix it up and do more opaque kind of paintings. If you end up not really liking watercolor, or you end up wanting to kind of mix the two together, you can water gouache down and use it just like watercolor, just, you know, add more water. Or you can use just a little bit of water and make it really thick and opaque. So this is really fun to do for if you're doing a landscape or something where you have a lot of little flowers or something like that, and you need those flowers to really stand out on top of maybe a lot of dark greenery, something like this. Like if I wanted to do something really light on top of this, it's going to be really hard to do that with just transparent watercolors. So this is where gouache would come into play with, you know, adding some highlights or doing something like that in there. So this is a fun little extra thing to have on hand.